Okay, today is the review day for the big test. And I taught you yesterday FCon over FCO because sometimes you're just given a great big problem like this. And you're asked to factor it, and they don't tell you anything else. And you're like, well, I don't know how to factor this. Especially, this one actually would factor by grouping, so it wouldn't be that bad. But if you don't know what the possible factors are, then you go FCon over FCO. Right now, I think you should be able to figure out that list for me of all the things that could possibly work. All right. I want you to slide into those groups where you have a partner. Everybody right now, if you're in row 1 and 2, slide together. If there's any gaps, figure out how to fill it in so that you got somebody to work with. All right. Obviously, I have a partner right there. Okay. What are the factors of the constant? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. And what are the factors of the coefficient? Well, thankfully, there's just a 1 there, so it's one factor is just a 1. So you divide everything by 1, which really doesn't do much. It just leaves you a great big list of all of that, except what needs to be in the front. Plus and minus of all of them. Now, which one works? You don't know. But if we want to know, we could look at, in this case, since I said it would factor by grouping, why don't you guys just kind of cheat a little bit and factor this by grouping and figure out which one of those actually is a root. And then use synthetic to actually prove it. Not let her stay where she was. You're displaced now because of these two guys. You need to hurry up, guys. Get it over with. Okay, so that x squared comes out, and that'll tell you which one of these is a root. Then I want you to do synthetic with this and factor it with synthetic. I know you can factor it other ways, but I want you to practice synthetic. If you want, you can just test every single one of them. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times 2 is, there's 12 of them. I wouldn't really want to do it that way. That's why I was suggesting maybe you look at the factor by grouping to figure out which one actually works. Okay, by now I hope you figured out that 2 factors out of this, you got x plus 6, and looks like 6 is probably it. Or is it negative 6? Okay, if it's negative 6, then use that with synthetic right now and factor that puppy using synthetic. 1, 6, 2, 12, draw the line, drop it like it's hot. Okay, when you're done, make sure that you interpret it and say, oh, so the factored form is this. I want to know what times what will make this. Then, when you're all done with that, solve it all the way down and say, oh, so the solutions are this, 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 and this. There should actually be 3 of them because it has a power of 3 in the original. So, 1 times negative 6, add them 0, multiply them 0, add them 2, multiply them negative 12. It worked! You should have said x plus 6, and you should have said that's the x to the zeros, x to the 1s, x to the 2s, x squared plus 2, and then this part comes out imaginary, and you get x equals plus and minus I root 2. How many of you got that perfect? And x equals negative 6. So, yes, there is 3. 1, 2, plus 1 more. That makes 3. Question? I like it in front, but if it's behind it, it's okay. Here's what would be wrong if you said that. If you put the I under the root, illegal. Got to have the I outside the root. And if you put it at the end, you risk me saying, hey, it looks like it's under the root. So just put it in front if you remember it. If you don't remember it, as long as it's not under the root, it's okay. All right. So there's like one from start to finish. But have you forgotten all the stuff from the beginning of the unit? Well, let's find out. Let's say that you had this, x plus 2, x minus 3 squared, and just an x in front. Can you remember? Oh, wait. Let's make it negative, because everybody forgets the negative in front. And then I'd like you to tell me what's the lead term that's different than the lead coefficient. And then I'd like you to tell me the degree of this thing. I'd like you to tell me its right end, its left end. There's some talking in the back that needs to stop or that group's breaking up. And then I want you to sketch it over here. Try one of those that kind of sums up the beginning of the chapter. Okay, I'll pause for a second while you try it. So here we go. The lead term. You pluck this guy, and that with that together, and put them all together, and you get x to the fourth, and it's negative. Negative 1x to the fourth. You don't have to have the 1. Raise your hand if you had that one right. And I bet a lot of people missed this x right here and just went 1 plus 2 makes 3. But no, there's an x there. Okay, that's a gotcha. You got to watch out for. Okay, next thing. The lead coefficient. Lead coefficient is the number on that, negative 1. What's the degree? The degree is the power on that, which is a 4. Next. If I'm going to pick the right end, I always base it on this. If there's a negative, then it's going down on the right. Then I decide, is it the same or different? Same, because even means same, and odd would mean different. This is an even, so it's the same. So it's down. And last, the sketch. You start with the zeros. Most kids get the zeros right. It's not that hard to say 0, negative 2, and 3. Here's 0, here's negative 2, and here's positive 3. Okay, those are the 3 spots from this, this, and this. Now, some people forget the 0 one because they forgot about the x in the front. If you didn't have a dot right here, you forgot about this x right here. Okay, now, if I know it ends, I always start on the right-hand side. I know it ends going down. I know it's down here somewhere. Now I'm going to go up and touch that 3. What should I do at the 3? Should I cut through or should I bounce? Bounce. You bounce at that. And then should I cut through or bounce at the 0? Cut through because it's got a 1 right there, so it cuts right through it. How about at the 2? Should I be bouncing? At the 2, should I be bouncing? No. And just by the way, I forgot to talk about these things. They're called the multiplicities. That's a fancy word I abbreviate with MPY. The multiplicity of this is 2. Multiplicity, multiplicity. The multiplicity tells you if it's a bounce or a cut through and all that. Okay, so this one, we were going through 2 and it was cutting through. So it goes like this. And then it heads downwards. There, are they both down? Yeah, that's what I said they would be. It's got a negative in front, so it's got to be going down on the right. There's my answer. Now, one more thing I told you at the very beginning of the unit, you can find the y-intercept pretty easy by setting x equal to 0. So I could put a 0 here, here, and here, and then I could figure out what exact spot this should be. Now, I'm not going to be that big of a deal on that unless it specifically says in the directions, find the y-intercept, in which case, you put a 0 here, here, and here. And if you think about that, the y-intercept is where x equals 0. 0 times all this stuff, it turned it all into 0. And that makes sense. The y-intercept was the same as the x-intercept. It's right there. It was at 0. It wasn't down here. All right. So 0 was the y-intercept and also an x-intercept. Okay, so there is a typical review question from the beginning of the unit. Now, I want to give you a whole bunch of time to review, and you would be really smart to ask me questions about this during class today because I might not be here tomorrow morning. Normally, I'm here on Thursday mornings. What I'm going to tell you is, if I am not going to be here, I'll send out a Schoology update that says, sorry, I'm sick tomorrow, which is feeling like it might be that way. But if you want to ask me questions, today would be the day in class, all right? So there's a review worksheet. It is under today's date. Has anybody already found it? Okay, go look. Look on Schoology. And I hope it's there. If it's not, I will post it right now. I'm going to pause for a second while I do that. All right. Yes, I was asked a question, could I review the thing we learned yesterday? Absolutely. It was called the rational root theorem, and it was where you'd find a list of things that would work. Let's just like talk through one of them quick. Let's say I had 2x to the 12th plus x to the 6th plus 2x minus 3. What is the important parts to tell me what could be roots? The beginning and the end. Okay, and let's make a distinction between possible roots and the actual roots, because that was his question. All right, what are the possible roots? Well, it's the factors of the f-con over the factors of the co. Would you please make a list of the factors of the constants, factors of the coefficients, and make me a list of everything that could work? And yes, there's some fractions in the list. Just make me a list of all the things that could work. Then we'll try to talk about how do we know if they're actually the answer versus just on the list of things that could work. All right, try that with your partner quick. Okay, so plus and minus all of these things. Factors of the constant, just negative. Well, you could say negative and positive, but I'm just going to keep it simple. 1 and 3 with the constant factors. And then 1 and 2 are the other ones. And so then if I take this one divided by 1, I get 1. This one divided by 1, I get 3. This one divided by 1, this one divided by 2, I get 1/2. And this one divided by 2, I get 3/2. Okay, there's my list of possible factors. Now, do you get why I call it possible roots? Do we know all of these things work? No. So how do I know which one does work? You just try them. And that means, and by the way, this is kind of a catch, but we always make at least one of them work. It's actually possible that none of them work. Because isn't it true that there are some things that just don't factor? Yeah, this is one of them. None of these would work. Okay, so then what's the right answer? The right answer is that this thing is not factorable, also known as prime. If it's possible that I try them and none of them work with synthetic, then none of them are the solution. I'll give you a really simple one. X squared plus 6x plus 3. That doesn't factor. Yet it has a constant and a coefficient, and I can get this list of things that could be it, but none of them actually work. I try them with synthetic, none of them work. That doesn't factor. Does that mean it doesn't have roots? No, it just means if you can factor it, you should, but then if you can't factor it, quadratic formula. So you could use a quadratic formula to get the answers, the roots, even if this synthetic thing didn't work out. All right, so that's the difference between the possibles, these are the possibles, and actual ones that worked. The actual ones that worked would mean you tried it, you stuck it in with synthetic like this. I need a bazillion placeholders here because it doesn't have a x to the 11th or 10th or 9th or 8th or 7th, you know what I mean? So I need zeros for all of those. And then it's got an x to the 6th, so there's 1 for that. And then it doesn't have an x to the 5th, 4th, 3rd, or 2nd. And then it has a 2 and a negative 3. That's what I'd have to actually do for this one. It's crazy. But then when I was done with it, it wouldn't have worked anyway, because there would have been a remainder. And then I'd say, oh, so 3 isn't one of the roots. And then you'd find out that none of them are actually the actual roots. Yes? Okay, so let's say that you had a 1/2 here, and you had a 2, 0, 1 as your numbers going across here. Tell me. So this is what you do. So you go 2. Doesn't matter if this was 9/8. I still would multiply just like this and put the answer here and add it down. So it doesn't matter how icky the fraction is, it still will work like normal. That times that makes this. 0 plus 1 makes 1. 1 times 1/2 is 1/2. And when I actually add these, I get 1 and 1/2 as my remainder. That one didn't work. But anyway, you can do it. You just put the fraction in like all the other ones. It's not like it's, totally different. You just throw the fraction there. Multiply, add, multiply, add. All right. So now, I don't want to stop the whole class because one person might still have questions. That person can come up and talk to me later if they have them. your job next is I'm going to put that worksheet up, and you're all going to work on it together. I'm going to pause for a second while I do. Okay, so here's that worksheet. When they ask you what the possible roots are, you should right away go, oh, that's f-con over f-co. Okay, so factors the constant. Hey, it's easy because it's a prime number. So it's 7 and 1. F-con. F-co, 1 and 2. So what are the possible factors? 7 and 1, because I divide them by 1, I get 7 and 1. And then 7 divided by 2 is 7 halves. And 1 divided by 2 is 1 half. There, that's the list of all of them, except I need a plus minus there at the front. Which one actually works? You don't know until you test them with synthetic. You stick them into synthetic and see if it works. So like, it doesn't say you have to test them, but if I wanted to, I would use synthetic like this and go, does 1 work? 2, oh, there's a placeholder needed. See, there's no x squareds. 2, so then 0x squareds, and then I have 5 x's, and then I have, wait a minute, what the heck? I think that's a typo. You guys see it? I bet you they didn't expect us to do it that way. I think that should be a squared. Everybody put a squared right there on the 5x. Make that a squared. Because then I don't have a placeholder. And otherwise I got to do 5x minus 3x makes 2x, and that's going to change everything. Actually, it won't change the lead coefficient, and it won't change the constant. But okay, so anyways, put in a squared right there. So far, it's the only mistake I've found. Only been doing it for a minute, but all right. Use any method to factor this completely. Okay, any method? Any method? Yeah, if you can factor by grouping, factor by grouping. Awesome. No need to do the factors of the constant, factors of the coefficient, and then synthetic and all that stuff. That one factors by grouping. All right. I'm going to slide up. Oh, let me, there we go. This one. That will not factor by grouping, and since it has an x to the third at the beginning, I can't divide it in the middle. I can't like do this kind of a thing with it because it's got an x to the third there. So what's the very first thing you're supposed to do when you're factoring stuff? You look for something that's in everything. There is something. What is in everything? An x. Get the x out first, and then I bet you'll be able to factor it further after that. Okay. Remember imaginary solutions? This is one that just killed me on the test. A ton of kids would put answers like, you know, root 3 there because they think that's imaginary. That's not imaginary. Just because it has a square root doesn't make it imaginary. It's a square root of a negative. That's imaginary. So don't just think that square roots are imaginary. They are not. If you have a square root of a negative, that'll be imaginary. Okay, so save imaginaries for if you have an I in your answer, then put it down there. All right. Scrolling up a little more to give you some more advice about these next ones. In here, I don't see anything that can factor out of everything. Hopefully there'd be an x or a 2 or something, but no, nothing factors out of everything. So then this is just this is cruel. Unless it can factor by grouping. I bet it can. Because do you really think the teacher wants you to find every single factor of 160? Holy crap, there might be like 73 of them. So it can't be that. So I'm thinking it's a factor by grouping. If it is, then 58 and 160 must have something in common. Aha. I bet you we factor an x squared out of this, and we factor something out of that. I'll let you figure out what. And it's a negative something. And I bet you can factor that by grouping. Otherwise, you got to be smart about this. The teacher's not going to ask you to check literally 28 things with synthetic to find the right one. All right. On this next one, once again, there's a GCF. Look at number 6. What goes into everything on number 6? 3. 3 does. You take a 3 out of this, 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 and this, and then your problem's way easier. All right. One thing I encourage you to do is, oh, look at number 7. It's got x squared in everything. All right. Definitely do that factor it at the beginning thing. Like factor something out of everything. Now there's a lot of problems here. I know there's a lot of problems here. But this is not an easy test. I can't afford to cut out too many. Okay? But I do feel like number 9 is one that I could cut out. Okay, so everybody cut off number 9. Scribble it out. I did go back and put in a bunch of homework last night, so if you looked and you're like, crap, I have 3 missing assignments now, it's because you haven't been doing your homework and I hadn't put it in a while. So get your homework done. Especially this one. This is like the most important homework. It's the one right before the test. All right. Number 10, it gives you a big hint. One of the factors is this. Well, I would still use synthetic. But I would maybe start by factoring out something first before I do the synthetic. Do you get how all of these have an x in it? Get that factored out first. You want to know the most common mistake on the test? People forget that they factored out like an x at the beginning, and they forget to include it in their answer. They got an x out at the very beginning, and then they forget it up here. And then when they get down to the bottom, they forget that that x was in there. You know what I mean? You leave it at the top, and you just don't bring it down when you're doing all this other work. But the way you can catch that, look for 5 answers at the end. Do you get what I mean? If it doesn't have 5 answers at the end, you forgot something up at the beginning. That's the most common mistakes. That's why I kept pounding on this whole, like, it's an x to the 5th. There better be 5 answers. Because that way, if you forget one at the bottom, you'd be like, oh, I didn't bring the x down. Cool. I only had 4 answers. I caught my mistake. I forgot to bring the x back down to the bottom. All right. So there's my advice for this test. And one last thought. This stuff's on the test a lot. It's at the very end of your review sheet. Don't get suckered into, like, practicing a ton of the stuff from the last 2 days and then forgetting that the beginning of this unit was still important too. You got to know how to do this kind. Now, I'm going to make number 14 optional. Okay, so you may scribble off 14 because I want to make your assignment reasonably sized, but you need to practice a couple of these because, you know, that stuff's on the test too. All right, so we've cut off a few. And this one's number 17. That's like one we did in class just a minute ago. So just to help me out for next hour, what are the ones I told you guys to skip again? You could skip 9 and 14. Thank you. All right. Rest of the time is yours. I'll see you guys tomorrow when you take your test.